Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this week's episode of Building Better Business, a practice management webinar series brought to you by FSOMA. Today's episode, How to Find the Right Hire and Build the Right Team to grow faster, is presented by Chen Yen from Introverted Visionary. My name is Natalia Morrison, and I'm the Director of Communications here at FSOMA. And just like you, I'm also a licensed acupuncturist. Before we begin, let's go over some housekeeping. This episode is being recorded and will be available for you to view at your leisure on our YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channels to see all our videos and be notified when new webinars like tonight's are posted. Please note that the information shared in today's episode by the speaker is for educational purposes only. The views expressed by speaker are those of the speaker and not necessarily those of FSOMA. And before we begin, I wanted to do some housekeeping just so you know how we're going to be interacting with you tonight. And we're going to request that you submit your questions throughout the presentation in the chat box. So both Chen Yan and myself will be able to monitor them and make sure that all your questions are answered. So Chen Yan is going to be presenting, and she would like that you submit your questions as she is presenting so that she can answer them in the middle of the presentation. There's a lot of questions that you may have that she will be able to answer that's already embedded in tonight's presentation, but she just wants to make sure that there's a mutual interaction between you and herself. So a little bit about Chen Yen. She's a national speaker and founder of Fill My Holistic Practice, providing introverted visionary acupuncturists like yourself a step-by-step process and guidance on building a 6 or 7-figure practice that runs without you. Her mission is to wake up the planet and make holistic options mainstream and the first line of care. Your patients need you. Don't be the best kept secret. So for a 6 and 7-figure practice makeover tips, you can visit her website at www.introvertedvisionary.com. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that into the chat box for you to be able to check out her webpage. So before we begin, I wanted to just know where all of you are joining us from. So I'm in Miami, Florida. I'm going to type it in the chat box, and we would love to know where you are located. And if you're joining us on our private Facebook page, go ahead and share with us where you're located as well. I'm going to be monitoring both our live Zoom and also through our Facebook page. Oh, hey, so we have someone from Chicago. Awesome. Welcome. And Chen Yan is actually joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. I've never been. I've heard it's amazing, though. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
All right. So yeah. So are you? Thank you. And so are you in a place where you are busy with patients, but you are also, you can see that if you continue to see more and more patients, you're going to start getting burnt out and be at capacity. Or maybe you are at a place where you find yourself doing all this admin stuff and paperwork, and it's not really your thing. You just want to focus on seeing patients instead of having to wear so many different hats. Can you relate to that? So you're definitely in the right place. And I am excited to share with you some of these things that aren't usually taught in school. And yet when you reach this level in practice, then they end up coming up. And so, and even if you're newer to practice, it's something great to be thinking about earlier on so that once you grow more, then you have more perspective of how to continue to help more people without sacrificing, getting burnt out and also, if you feel like you're not saving enough money for retirement too, this is something to be looking at as well. So because there's only so much time in the day and only one of you to go around. And so I would love for us, as we start out here, I would like for you to type in the chat. I know some of you have been typing where you're from. I'd also love to see what drew you to this call. For example, first, share what kind of a practice you have. I know some of you are primarily practicing acupuncture, and then you also work in Chinese herbs, and then some of you are also doing other things like functional medicine, and some of you have also gotten into more virtual practice kinds of things too. So I would love to see where you're at with that in your practice right now. Just a quick share in the chat. Love to see. Then let me know what drew you to this call. For example, is it because you are looking to hire your first person, or and what kind of a person is it? Or maybe you already have staff and or a team and would like to expand. So I'm curious where you're at, and that way I can actually tailor what we cover here today to what you need the most. And some of the things we're going to be talking about also will allow you to have more flexibility and freedom too. So as we get in here today, we're going to be getting into what are the keys to being able to free up your time more, and without feeling like you have to be in the office to have everything run smoothly, right? And how do you go about, because it actually starts from who you hire to, and how you attract them, to then also what happens after you hire them, and how is your leadership after you hire. So those are the keys we're getting into today. And as we get into this, I'm also going to share a little bit about who you're learning from, so you know who you're learning from. So as far as when I started out as a pharmacist on Native American reservations, and really enjoyed traveling to the different tribes and getting to know the different tribes and cultures. And it was adventurous for a little while. But then after a little while, started getting jaded. I would go into the pharmacy, I would hand out these medications to people. And I remember giving this woman her Prozac medication, and I felt so upset at it, just not at her, but at what our healthcare system was putting in front of her, as if that were the only option, and I was endorsing it. The truth was, I grew up in a family that was very conservative with medications. Whenever while growing up, when my sister and I were sick, my mom would open up the cabinet, pull out some Chinese herbal syrup, and give it to us, and that would almost pretty much be the extent of what we'd get, right? Whereas I would see these little kids come in, they would be getting immunization shots and then leave with a cocktail of medications, Tylenol and a few other medications. And I would also see adults come in getting bagfuls of medications as if they're candy, 15 to 20 medications, no big deal. This is day in and day out. And it drove me crazy. Have you ever been in a place in your life where you felt like you didn't like what was going on, but you didn't know what to do next? Well, that was what was happening to me at the time. And so without having more clarity, the only thing I did know was I had to get out of there. So I looked around, thought, there are pharmacists around me who are unhappy in their jobs. What if I could help them get into jobs they enjoyed more? So fast forward 5 years, I had started and grown a successful recruiting business to 7 figures in that time frame, and sending pharmacists to Native American reservations for travel assignments. And I used to always think that if I just make more money, then I could do what I really cared about outside of work. But it didn't show up that way for me. I went through this time frame where I did a lot of soul searching, and finally came out the other side, realized that I needed to stop pretending, because there's this part of me that I felt like was still selling my soul to for people to be on drugs, because I still had that, that recruiting business. And so I thought about what could really shift our healthcare system. And isn't it cool that acupuncture and Chinese medicine is more widely accepted now than it was 20 years ago? So there's been a lot of progress, but there are still people who don't have any idea how acupuncture or Chinese medicine can help. And it's not going to be the government that changes things. It's not going to be the insurance company that changes things. It's not going to be the drug companies that changes this. It starts with you being able to get the word out about what you do. So people are asking for it, and that's when things will change. Because imagine having an true integrative healthcare system where holistic options are first line of care in this country. Wouldn't that be amazing? And in situations where, certainly acute situations, there's a need and for conventional medical purchase, and certain other situations where holistic options may not be able to be as beneficial. And so that's what led us to help acupuncturists and other holistic health practitioners with being successful in their practices, because then that will help more people actually recognize that there are other options aside from just drugs and surgery. And so since then, we've helped many clients anywhere ranging from, board members of acupuncture associations to past president of the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians to a past president of American Chiropractic Association, Sports Council. And then we've also helped clients who are either newer to practice to also those who are very successful already in their practices and wanting to grow to that next level, ushering them into multi-6 and 7 figures using our introverted visionary systems in a 3 to 4 year time frame. So as far as you might be thinking, well, what does you growing, that business have to do with me being able to grow my practice in a way that is sustainable? So I will say that, for one, having come from that experience in recruiting, there were a lot of mistakes that I used to make when both for my own team and primarily I would say my own team, right? Because how many of you feel like if you were to do things for other people, you could do well for other people, but for yourself, it's like you have blind spots or you have certain feelings and things, and then think, and how you end up working with your team doesn't end up working out as well, right? So that was me in terms of just really struggled initially with, because I thought of the idea of, yay, let's have a team and it's going to help me. And then, there are things that I did that didn't work out too well. So the things that I'm going to be sharing with you today come from systems that we have developed over time that I've, had learned my lessons. Also in us becoming one of the most requested recruiting companies in the Indian Health Service. We went from completely starting to scratch to being one of the most requested ones, and seeing what works and what doesn't work in the hiring process, and from helping other acupuncturists with this at this point in time. And so when you are, we talked about this in terms of also, one of the things that as you grow, some of you are at different stages with this. Some of you are excited about having more help, and some of you are actually kind of jaded about it. And some of you, because maybe you had a bad experience, you heard about other people having a bad experience. And one thing that I'm curious about is this, like, what if you were to be able to just show up and collect a check every week, and your patients are taken care of, people are helped, and you're also making money even if you're not there? How would that feel? And so we'll talk a little about some of those things in terms of the concerns that you might have, and what your challenges are right now in getting to that place, if you choose to be in that place, or even if you don't choose to be in the place, it's nice to have help instead of doing everything yourself, isn't it? And so this is, my journey in terms of with that. I also want to mention, I hit a wall at a certain point in time in my business, and it wasn't until some of these things that I'm talking to you about today that shifted more, that I was able to end up showing up once a week and collecting a check from my accountant meet with my accountant once a week and collect a check. And so if I can do it, then you can do it too. So the first thing that I just want to mention about this is that there are, in the different stages of practice, there are different key areas of focus. And when you are growing, there's just a couple quick things I'm going to mention here. So one is about the growing phase, because initially it's about kind of seeing if things will work, if you're going to get patients, that kind of thing, right? Then it becomes, okay, you're excited because people are coming in and it's consistent, but it might be exhausting. And so in this phase, it's really important for you to not only get known and recognized more, but also build structure around you that support that. And do you have the right support in place? And if it's a painful situation right now, sometimes it's also about, have you ever felt this way before? As you grow your business, have you felt like things get more complicated, where it was simple back in the day and now it's just gotten more complicated? So are you spending time in your practice focusing on how can you simplify your business model and increase efficiency in the practice, and for the best patient experience, and also for internally for your whole team? So I put this in this time frame in terms of if you're growing, this is $10,000 to $50,000 a month that you might be making, right? And then here, so it's these to the right is like must haves. Like it's hard to go to the next stage without putting those things on the right side in place. But it also means that even if you have no interest in let's say making more than $50,000 a month, it's still already important to be focusing on, even in the stage of a practice, as long as you don't want to be always seeing patients. And so today we're talking about this piece, which is the A team and CEO leadership here under the scaling phase, because there are different things to focus on when you're trying to get a practice up and running off the ground, and the different things to focus on when you're actually growing into the next level in the practice. And so there are a few reasons why many acupuncturists never make a sustainable of a big impact as they really could in their practices. And so one of the things about this is with let me just I think one of the hardest things is, and interestingly enough, as it grows, as it has to do with hiring and building a team, the more I have been in business, the longer I've been in business, and the more I've seen our clients and what they struggle with, and what shifts for them, and the more that I also continue to grow with this. To be honest, I will say some of the biggest challenges related to hiring and growing a team have to do with things that are in between our ears, that are patterns or non-supportive beliefs. So I'm curious for you, what are some of the things that come up for you? First of all, what would you like to have happen in your practice? So I see here, someone's writing here, James says, hiring additional acupuncturists would be 3 of us. Exciting, awesome. And who else? What is your goal here with this? Go ahead and type in the chat so I can see. And then I see someone else writing, strong herbal and food therapy focus now after the pandemic, and acupuncture, and Walter's from Chicago, so welcome. So feel free to type in the chat, what is your goal here? And then what are some of the things that come up in your head about that, whether it's the hiring the additional acupuncturists, or about what you're dealing with related to this thing that you want to shift right now in your practice? And so one struggle is certainly one of you to go around, and also the idea of letting go of control. Have you ever felt this way, where you feel like if you so I'm going to speak to this because I'm not seeing as many people type in the chat, so I'll just talk about what likely your situation is. So you're either in a situation of maybe wanting to hire first hire, or you're in a situation of you've been hiring. But so we'll talk first about the situation of if you haven't, if this is one of your first hires, right? Are you in a place where you feel like letting go of, like you feel like only you can do things better than other people? So you kind of feel concerned about hiring because they might not do it up to your standards. And then if you are already having staff right now, I'm curious, is there anything that is still something that you are choosing to not let go of right now? so that this could actually be an area of opportunity for you. Because regardless of what stage, whether you're hiring newly or you are wanting to get your next hires, this is a common challenge I see a lot of practitioners make and acupuncturists make. So go ahead and type in the chat. What is one area of opportunity for you related to letting go of control? Might it be even letting go of, maybe you still feel like you need to see some patients or still a decent number of patients, but maybe you don't really need to. Or maybe there is something related to office management kinds of things, that there's something related to that you're still dealing with because you feel like it can only be done by you better, right? So consider that, because when you can actually have more freed up, then you can focus on what you enjoy doing most. So I'm curious for you, what would you like to be doing with your time? If we were to look at your practice, let's say 3 years from now, or even look further down the road, if you can, what would you like your role to be 5 years from now? Go ahead and type that in chat. What would you like your role to be 5 years from now? And if your answer is something like, oh, I still want to see some patients, but I also want other practitioners to be seeing people for me, or I want you to get even more specific with that. So what does that mean? So how many patients a week would you like to be seeing? And then how many would you like to for other practitioners to be seeing in the practice, for example? Or how much time off do you want to have? Maybe it's a stretch of time, or maybe it's certain days of the week that you have off. So being really clear about this next level phase of growth for you is really important as you evaluate this or reevaluate. So go ahead and type in the chat. I'm curious. So feel free to type it in the chat. So another common hang up that I see a lot of acupuncturists make, and we're going to talk about hang-ups first, and then we're going to go into specifics, nuts and bolts that you're going to be able to walk away with today to apply to your hiring situation to attract the right hires to you, and onboard them and step into that CEO leadership role more, so that you really have a practice that can run like a well-oiled machine. And so I'm seeing a chat here from James, says practice on autopilot, seeing 10 patients a week. Nice. And then I'm also curious, how much time would you like off, and whether it's a long stretch of time or how many days a week would you like to be off as well? So another kind of a hang up thing that I hear a lot is this idea that I feel I can't afford it. How many of you have felt that way before, whether about your first hire or about your next hires? For example, we had a client of ours who he went all the way from first working another job to then and having a practice on the side to then having the practice full time through working with us. And then he ended up he ended up getting busier, and his practice shifted into cash-based practice, also got busier and booked 2 weeks out. And then he just felt like he was wearing too many hats. So the first big leap was hiring an admin person when he didn't even know if it would work out, kind of thing, or how he would find the person and that kind of thing, and how would he afford them, right? And then the second big leap that he made was hiring an associate. And one of his concerns was that, how to, at different stages, like, well, what if I just don't know if I would be able to bring in the number of patients to support it. And so, because how many of you have noticed yourself hold back on that and wait to hire, right? But then you start getting busier and busier. And then sometimes maybe you end up hiring when you're more desperate. Has that ever happened to you before? And so one thing that ended up happening with him that he just feels so blessed about was that something unexpected happened with someone in his family that he had to attend to. It was a family emergency. It happened pretty recently, actually. he had just hired his associate, within the last month and a half or so, and he felt so blessed, because if he had to attend to that family emergency and then there was nobody else hired to help him to see patients, then his patients weren't taken care of, right? So the question is, sometimes, can you afford not to hire as well? And then if you really feel like you can't afford to hire, what are some possible things? I'll share specifics on possibilities with that a little bit here. Also, the concern that maybe I'm afraid that they won't stay. So, and feeling like you might need to go through that again, especially if you've had a bad experience before. How many of you have had a bad experience and it left a bad taste in your mouth, or you heard other people having bad experiences, so you're scared, right, about this because you don't want it to happen to you, so you just continue to just see more people yourself. Or maybe headaches with current staff. So even if you have good people, but there's still, it can happen where you feel like, oh, I just don't want to be managing, right? Just don't have to deal with this. So go ahead and type in the chat, what is a challenge? And if you related to growing a team or hiring, again, just so I know what to focus the rest of what we talk about today to what you need most. And you're welcome to type it in to me privately as well if you don't want other people to see it. So the other common struggle I see is dreading that it will take double the effort and responsibilities. But the cool part of what I've noticed is that many times, if you have things in place, if you have structures and systems in place that support this, initially it might feel like more responsibility. Why? Because you are spending time training. And so you might feel like, oh, this is taking up too much time. But then after you get to that hump, usually many times after the first 90 days, then it starts being where it's less responsibility, but just a different kind of a response. I mean, it's less responsibility as far as everything on your shoulders. It's just a different kind of responsibility, right? So the solution about these issues is being in your zone of genius. What is your zone of genius? Have you really thought about that? You know, many of you initially might think, well, it's seeing patients, of course. But some of you have other talents and strengths and interests. For example, I have a client of ours who I'm thinking about who to share with you about this. I'll share this client with you. She's an acupuncturist, and she has staff members, and she's gotten it to the point where all she does, she doesn't treat patients, but she does see the patients initially for the first visit and helps with the treatment plan. And then her acupuncturists see the patients from there on out. And then she loves learning. So she'll spend her time more on the learning side of things, clinical side of things, and also marketing related. And then she actually enjoys marketing. So she spends her time collaborating with physicians and growing the practice. But she doesn't treat a single patient, right? And we just ushered her into 7 figures this year. So are you in your zone of genius? Because that's what she likes to do. It might not be what you like to do, but that's what she likes to do, right? And so what would you like to be doing that's really, it's like you play at this thing, and instead of and that way you can hire other people who maybe the things that you don't really like to do that they play at it, right? So and let's look at, for example, an associate hire. So assuming that an acupuncturist makes $100,000 a year and brings that into the practice, well, if you are let's just assume that they're keeping 60K of it. And even if you just made 40K, I'm just being really conservative, right? But even if you just made 40K a year, that's still an extra $40,000 you didn't have to see patients for. Or if you have 2 acupuncturists, that can be an extra $80,000 a year that you didn't have to see patients for. And on top of that, they're helping patients but you couldn't have ever seen anyway, right? Just by yourself. So what's a hot tip here for those of you who've had experiences before where you feel like it didn't work out, or you've been hearing things that it didn't work out, even if you haven't been in that situation yet. So one hot tip is, if you are interested in hiring an associate, and we'll talk about other kinds of hires in a moment here, is to don't expect your associate to market. This is one of the biggest mistakes a lot of acupuncturists make when wanting to hire an associate. So don't expect your associate to market. Why is this? Because if they were great at marketing and loved marketing, then what's your complementary value? What are you bringing to the table? They might as well just go and get patients themselves, right? They'll get to keep all the money. So there's not much complementary value. So if you're looking at hiring an associate, look at how can you actually have you bring in patients into the practice for your associates, and then they just show up and see patients for you. So, so then that is one hot tip. And can it be different? Can there actually be associates who love to market? Certainly. We've had acupuncturists who've even paid for their associate to come and work with us and then get the practice busier. So that's still possible. However, what I'm trying to say here is as a whole, you're probably going to be more successful typically by looking for and creating a great situation for someone who can just come into the practice and see and just focus on seeing patients. You'll probably, as a whole, also retain them more likely. And then you just need to have systems in place that support getting the phone ring more for your associate. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about what are some other kinds of hires that that are likely you might be thinking, right? So, or actually before we get into that, what is one way, because I see here something like, not sure if timing is right, or can we afford to expand? So there are a couple of factors to take into consideration to make that decision. And one of them is this as well too. So, well, for one, in terms of if we can afford to expand, part of it is looking at, do you have the structures in place that support, for example, if you are going to hire an associate, do you have a tried and true method, a system that brings in patients consistently? If not, then maybe that's the step we need to work on first before that. Now, so that's one consideration. Another consideration is to look at, what are you really getting paid right now? So what are you getting paid right now? So many of you will just likely tell me how much you're charging people per hour, right? You might say to me $75 or 125 or however much you're charging. So, but do you really know how much you truly are getting paid per hour? And when I first did this process I'm about to show you, I don't know what the right word is to describe it, but I felt embarrassed actually, right? I felt embarrassed because here I thought I was making pretty good money, but when in actuality, I really wasn't getting paid very much. I was getting paid like an admin kind of a salary almost by the end of it when I was looking at this initially. So what to do to figure this out? This is a very powerful process to do regardless of what stage or practice you're in and whether you've hired or not before, is to work this out, to be honest with yourself. So how much time, so the first step is to actually keep time, like do time tracking. One good time tracking software is called Toggle. I'm going to pop that in the chat right now. It's spelled Toggl. So you can use it on an app or on your iPhone, or you could use it on the computer desktop. It's really easy to use. It's free. So track your time of what you're doing in a week under different kind of categories, right? So for example, if you do something and you're picking up the laundry for your practice, or you're doing admin stuff like that, and well, how much would you actually pay someone to do those things? So write those things down and how much time you're spending on it every week. Maybe it's like $15 an hour kinds of things. How much time are you actually spending on $50 an hour kinds of tasks or $150 an hour kinds of tasks? So $150 or $50 an hour tasks might be more esteemed patient kinds of things. But some of you might think, well, what about the $1,000 an hour? How does that happen? So this is where, do you do things within the practice that actually bring in leverage for the practice? For example, we have an acupuncturist client of ours who she has leverage when she sees fertility patients, but she also does a workshop that is, there's at least always 4 people in it at a minimum. She did her very first one, she had 4 people in it. And she charges $400 for it, and it's 4 hours, right? So that's $1,600. $1,600 divided by 4 hours, she's making $400 an hour. And then now she has more people in it. So when she has more people in it, she's making $1,000 an hour, right? So do you have things like that where you're bringing value to people without it being trading time for money right now? So, or it might be bringing another stream of income. For example, now she also has an automated online course. So during when this whole COVID thing happened, she texted me. She said, thank goodness we got this in place before then, because now I can still help people that way and online too. So, or it might be, do you have another stream of income through whether it might be supplements or herbs and so that don't tie into just seeing you. So in terms of what I was going to say about this is what you're going to do is you're going to keep track of time for week. Then you're going to put the tasks there and what you're doing and the number of hours you're spending on it. You're going to total up each column, and you're going to total up how much time you spend under, $15 an hour, $50 an hour, $150 an hour tasks. And there's a formula here that when you add it all up and then you divide it by the number of total hours from all the columns, that's going to give you the number. How much are you really getting paid now? So highly recommend this process, doing this periodically in your practice, in your business, to truly be honest with yourself about assessing, are you spending things on things that are best use of your time and talents? Or are there areas of opportunity for growth for you? So the next thing to look at, because we're talking about, right now we're talking about deciding who and when it makes sense, right? So this is the 4 weeks to new hire system, or it's actually a 6 and 7 figure hiring system. And we're talking about the first step, because the first thing is to decide who and when, and then finding them. So a lot of people shop for stuff. Successful entrepreneurs shop for great hires. And one thing about this is, what I highly recommend each one of you is to always be on the lookout for your next level of hiring. For example, who could I have around me to support me this coming year? And know that, and always be on the lookout, because sometimes some of your best hires will come when you're not desperate of hiring someone yesterday, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then the other thing is, could you hire more of a self-managing team? And they could be practitioners. It could be, so it might be acupuncturists or other practitioners, or it could be some people who support you with sales or marketing. It could also be admin staff or office manager. So here's the thing about the office manager that I just want to bring up also. Have you ever felt like you, even though you have an office manager, you still feel like there's a lot of weight on your shoulders? A lot of acupuncture practices don't truly have an office manager. They just have a glorified front desk receptionist. But if you're truly looking for an office manager, for some of you who are at that time frame in your practice, what will happen is that an office manager will look out after your profits also. Things like leading the team, those things, because imagine if you didn't have to look over your team's shoulders as much. Imagine if you had someone in charge of things related to internal marketing, meaning things like inspiring referrals or other kinds of things that you might do in the office to inspire new patients to come from it. That You didn't have to be the mastermind behind it, right? So some of you, if you're finding yourself feeling like there's still a lot of weight on your shoulders related to operations and admin, chances are it might be time to up level into an office manager or a practice manager. And then the other thing to think about too is, have you ever thought about having a virtual assistant? This is the sort of thing that even, to be honest, I've never met any one of my staff of two of my companies in terms of in person ever. Everyone's been virtual. Been very blessed. And so, but even after, and especially after what's happened in the last year or so, more people, there's more talent out there who are doing things more remotely. Are there things where you have in your office that can be done remotely, and it could save you overhead from someone having to sit in that space to be there to help you? So that's something to consider. And there's also virtual assistant help with even chart noting and things like that can be done. And they're outsourced VAs you can hire even from overseas if you're concerned about, I can't afford it, and things like that too. Right? So there's a range of things that you can consider. Also, the other thing is automation. Do you have automation in place that, because sometimes as we grow, we might think, okay, we just need to hire and hire, and then get kind of top heavy with our who we have on our team, or feel like there's more expenses than you can really sustain for, or feeling like you just don't feel like continuing to manage more and more people. So, we actually experienced this ourselves recently where there is something that one of our people on our team used to do. And we started looking at it and thought, why don't we automate it? This is silly. Why are we doing this all the time? And guess what? We automated this part of this person's role to the point where they hardly had to be involved. And it saved us so many hours per week. And so the question I want you to ask yourself is there anything that maybe it isn't about hiring someone else? What can we automate? And if you actually focus on one automation project every quarter, it could move your practice forward significantly. For example, our clients are doing things like getting things automated for what is sent to a patient before the first visit, what is sent to a patient after the first visit, what's sent to people who aren't necessarily their patients but have gotten connected with them. So these kinds of things can end up becoming more and more automated, so that it doesn't have to be your staff calling and reminding people, or texting and reminding people all the time. How many would like that, right? So having things more automated. Yeah. So, okay, so we talked about deciding who and when briefly, and then let's talk a little bit about evaluating pay. So, I think one thing about pay, what's your biggest question related to this? So feel free to type this in the chat. Now, I saw something about determining, in terms of whether it's the right time to forward someone and that kind of thing. So I brought up a few ways to look at that. So what if you feel like you can't afford anyone right now, but you would really like to hire? So what can you do if, in that scenario? Remember I mentioned first thing is maybe we need to get your income up first. So maybe that's one thing we need to work on right now. Based on your existing staff, how can we get your income up? How can we get your patient numbers up? And then another thing would be about, as you look at affording them too, what if you do feel like you can't afford them right now? So there are a couple things that you could do. One is you can consider looking for someone perhaps with less experience than you currently wanted, whether it's an intern or that kind of thing. But just remember, the drawback of that is that you're going to have to trade that with more time spent on ramping them up. Another possibility is that you can consider putting money away for saving for your next hire. So most acupuncturists make the mistake of, and a lot of business owners do initially also, especially, is looking at hiring as an expense. primarily looking at hiring as an expense. And even seasoned business owners, they're business owners who would spend money on clinical stuff all day long, but they will not spend money on hiring anybody, or feel like, oh, that's too expensive, I can't afford it quite yet, or right. And so one of the biggest mindset shifts as we look at, especially since we've ushered clients into multi 6 and 7 figures in a 3 to 4 year time frame, is really looking at hiring as an investment. Because it is an investment. It's an investment in them being able to help more people than you ever would have been able to just by yourself. It's an investment in them to be able to get to a point where they're bringing money into the practice without you having to do all that yourself. Now, what have you ever felt like you secretly feel like you are a micromanager? Okay, so James asking a question: how do you determine how much to pay a new associate? Good question. So there are a couple of considerations here. One is certainly look at what practices in the area are paying an associate. And there are 2 schools of thoughts about this. One is to be competitive. Another school of thought is to pay them more automatically. Why? Because then you end up attracting people who feel really proud of getting paid more than at other places. And then you automatically stand out. So it's your choice about that in terms of the right sweet spot for you with that. The other thing to consider is when it comes to pay, and what kind of structure is this? So this is where in hiring, it's very important to find out what, because everyone is motivated by different things. Everyone's motivated by different things. Some people are actually some people are motivated by having longer vacation, but not necessarily getting paid more. Some people are motivated by other kinds of things, whether it might be benefits or whether it might be being a part of a practice where they're really getting trained and they're getting fostered with growth. That matters more to them than getting paid more. So when you asked how to determine how much to pay a new associate, those are things to take into consideration. Now, when you say new associate, though, what I'm curious about is if you're referring to new grad, or because then that might be a little different too in terms of the range of experience. But hope that helps as a starting place. So are you? So back to this, we were talking about, well, are you a micromanager? Huh? So how many of you kind of feel, I would admit secretly that you manage them a little more than you would like to right? In terms of it, you kind of get concerned that you're probably micromanaging, or so how could you hire a self-managing team? I confess, I'm one of these people, and like where my tendency is to end up micromanaging. Why? Because I have these high standards for my team, and if they're not performing up to my standards, then I start digging into, hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? Right? But then how can we uphold those standards of our team without us always having to look over their shoulder? And so it starts with, for one, if you can hire a self-managing team more, then you won't have to manage them as much. So how do you actually attract people who are more self-managing? So let's talk about this. Now, step 1 is to attract the right hire. And so how do you source them? How do you attract them? Where do you find them, and how do you attract them? That's the first step. For example, we had a client of ours, an acupuncturist, who she posted this up, and so she posted this in our 4 weeks to a new hire program, and she said that, so she was someone who had hired. Let me think about what happened with this. She had hired someone who didn't work out, and she was a little hesitant to hire again, but she also knew she needed to, because she just had a baby, and she really needed some extra help. So she was looking for an acupuncturist for over 6 months and couldn't find the right one. She would interview these people, and she thought, it's just not the right fit for the practice. And she started feeling discouraged. Have you ever been in that place in your practice? Have you where you felt discouraged in the hiring process? Nod your head or type in the chat yes or no, right? And so we worked on some of the things from the 4-week to hire system. And she was super excited because she said, oh, they're, for example, she said, they're having a very intentional ad. I believe I found the perfect hire. So that's one of the steps, which is one of the first steps, which is, do you have a good, attractive ad and role description, right? Do you have a good, attractive ad and role description? For example, for hers, this is written in such a way that is attracting the hire, instead of, because most ads are written in such a way that is like, oh, we're looking for XYZ, right? And it's really focused on about the acupuncturist owner, instead of focused on how would this be attractive for someone. So there are two things that you'll want. So the attractive ad and a role description. What's the difference? So an ad is one that's front facing the public. A role description is one that's and public front facing the public, meaning it needs to be attractive to the person who's looking, right? A role description is more of the role responsibilities that is used to measure their success when they're already hired. Like, are they actually doing their job well, right? So then it's helpful to have both. There's certainly overlap, but then it helps to have both. So that's the purpose of a clear role description. For example, this is example of a role description, right? So and responsibilities, instead of, this is not an example of an ad. So whereas this is an example more of an ad. And so what are some of the elements to an attractive ad? So it includes what they want instead of what you are looking for primarily. And then it also, like, what would be attractive about the role, right? It also includes your mission. And so this is something that a lot of acupuncturists don't think to put in there, or even if they do, they haven't really thought much about their mission in particular. So what is your mission? You know, one of the things that can attract a good hire to your practice is having a strong mission that they feel really excited about. Do you have that? And are you sharing it with people? Do your new hires know about this? Does your whole team know about it? Are they living and breathing it? And if not, then how can you incorporate this throughout the whole hiring process, including starting from the ad itself? Then what about adjectives? So this is something that I learned from someone who's run multi-million-dollar companies and billion-dollar companies, and it's quite helpful and brilliant. What is it is to include adjectives within your ad of the qualities that you're looking for, whether it's conscientious, self-starter, you know, those kinds of qualities, are warm and thoughtful, whatever kinds of qualities you would like to also list them out in a couple of lines, like 2 lines or so of a list, 2 or 3. And what I've noticed since we've started doing this, and also with our clients have shared this with us too, is that when people call, they'll make comments about it. They'll say, oh, you know, I looked at that and I thought that was me. That's me, right? So it helps them self-identify even more. And finally, initial screening questions. So do you have initial screening questions in your post, or is it just a typical post where have you ever felt like, oh, part of the hiring process is a drag because you have to sift through so many resumes? Have you ever felt that way before? Well, do you have initial screening prep questions? I typically recommend 3 or potentially 4. In a job market where it's more of an employee's job market, then I would encourage fewer questions, like 2. Right. So what are we in right now? So it depends on the role right now. In certain roles, we're more in an employee job market than an employer's market. So as far as a big time saver is those specific initial screening questions. So let me share with you behind the scenes of you know, a successful recruiting business with this, and some of the questions that we've incorporated to ask and that our clients have asked. Because would you like that? Would you like to have those interview questions? So I'm going to make sure to give you, let me see here. I'm going to pop this in the chat so you have access to some of these interview questions from the toolkit. And I'm also going to share with you a couple of things here. So you can go there, you can go to this link here and then download the Half Your Hiring Time Toolkit, which includes some of the top interview questions to ask. And I'll also share a couple with you right now, and so you can hear the distinction of how it might be different from what you've asked in the past. So, what is this trying to prevent you from in terms of specific interview questions that really help suss out the right person better than perhaps you've done before? The cost of turnover can add up. This is a study done where it's, many times it's 20%. The cost to replace an employee, each time it costs 20% for someone who's in a mid-range position making $30,000 to $50,000 a year, right? Now you might look at this and you might think, okay, so a cost to replace for someone who's making $40,000 a year is at least $8,000. Well, that doesn't include the headaches that you might go through to have to do it all over again. It doesn't include the it's like your time opportunity costs of having spent all that time training, right? And it not working out. So that's why these kinds of things are helpful to, instead of mainly hiring based on how you feel. Have you ever had that feeling? I had that feeling just even the other day. I was all excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to hire this person. And then I stepped back and I thought, okay, go through the process. So I'm going to share with you a couple of hot tips that you likely haven't heard before coming up here. So part of the issue might be not an effective hiring process, and the other part of the issue is the lack of a good onboarding process. So let's talk about your actual screening process right now. What is your screening process? Do you have, for example, what I would recommend? Oh, actually, I promised you giving you a couple questions for the initial interviews. Let me do that. What I like to ask earlier on is making the question more open-ended and not as much about the role. Why is this helpful? Because have you ever, maybe you've done this before in some job you had in your lifetime where you went and you prepared, oh, this is what I need to make sure I'm prepared to say, right? Most job seekers prepare too. And so if you ask the canned kind of questions, and they're going to give you canned answers, you're not really going to find out much of what you really need to know. So for example, I like to typically ask questions that are more open-ended about what they would prefer. And then I could see, okay. And it's amazing because the questions I've asked have helped uncover sometimes I think, oh, this is really not going to be the right role for them. Or maybe I actually have a different role that might be better for them based on what they're sharing. So that's one hot tip. For example, I would ask things like, what attracted you to this particular opportunity? That's one of the first questions. Or if you could design your workday however way you'd like, what would you love? What kinds of things would you love to be doing in a typical workday? For an admin kind of role, I might ask, well, what percentage of time do you prefer being on the phone versus behind the scenes, right? Because sometimes I found this with admin, where sometimes I might hire an admin and I'd expect them to do both, and then they really don't like to talk on the phone, and then that's not going to work out very well if you are expecting that they spend more time on the phone than they would really prefer. Another great question I love to ask is this: and this comes from the book it's a great question. So who is the last person who's your supervisor? Because have you ever had people who tell you, oh, my strengths are this, and everything sounds peachy and rosy, and then you hire them, oh gosh, they didn't actually have the ability to do this and that, and then but you had done the reference checks, or you had asked them questions during the interview and didn't suss these things out. So one great question, or maybe you ask people about strengths and weaknesses. Well, what are they going to say about their weakness? They're going to find the weakness that's really not much of a weakness and tell you, right? And so what can you find out more with that would be more valuable for you? For example, asking the question, who's your last supervisor? And what was how would they rate you on performance on a scale of 1 through 10 when we talk to them? Not if, but when we talk to them. Why? Because then they're going to be a bit more vigilant about what they say, because you are going to talk to them. So they will be more in line with what they're talking about, likely with what's actually the truth. So another great question to ask after that is say, what would they say are your biggest strengths? What would they say are your biggest strengths? And then you can also ask, what would they say are your biggest areas for improvement? And you will be amazed at some of the things that sometimes come out of these conversations. Sometimes you might find out a bit about where they're coming from in terms of their mindset, or sometimes they might even bash a previous employer, their previous supervisor, right? And that's a red flag, when people bash other people in an interview. So, so then is this helpful? How many of you are finding this helpful so far? Go ahead and type in the chat. So there are a few other key questions, interviewing questions that I'm including in that toolkit, which is in the chat there, that you can click on. So now let me share with you another thing that is super important too that I found. So what in the screening process, it's part of it is the interview process. What is it, right? So I'd like to do an initial phone interview, and then I also like to do a more extensive interview. So because how can you cut down time, right? So in interviewing people, so they're in our 4 weeks to new hire system, we actually have questions that can help you get more to the heart of things faster in an initial interview and a phone screen. So you don't have to meet with them in person first. And then the second interview, you could do a longer one. And nowadays you could even do that through Zoom if you would prefer. Or if you really feel like they need to come into the office at that point, then do a longer second interview, right? And then what are you including in part of the screening process aside from interviewing, aside from the obvious? So this is something I'm about to share with you that I had heard about this from one of my mentors. And at first I heard about it and thought, oh yeah, that's nice. And I thought, well, we already have a good screening process in place. We don't really need to change it up too much at the time. So I didn't really do too much with it. Then later on, I ended up, so I'm a part of different business mastermind groups where we've paid significantly to be a part of it in year-long masterminds. And I was a part of different masterminds, and these 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs, whenever they would talk about hiring, they would always bring this thing up because we would say, oh, what do you use in your hiring process? And they would always bring this up. And I thought, oh, interesting. A lot of people are using this at that level in terms of their hiring process. So I ended up looking into it more. And what is that's very helpful in the hiring process is assessing. So there are a few different kinds of assessments. There's one that's the affect that assesses affective. It's like more behavioral or personality kinds of things. So things like the Myers-Briggs DISC assesses for that. Then there's cognitive side. So cognitive side is more of things like this, like speaking, like spelling bee kinds of things. Right? It's like assessing competency in certain things, or maybe clinical competency. That's more the cognitive side. Then there's the conative side. And when I first heard about this, I never heard about it before. But guess what? I guess it's been around since like Aristotle years or something. but conative, what is it? It's actually, it helps test for or measures like how you tend to like to work, how you tend to like to go about doing things. And it typically doesn't change over your lifetime kind of thing. It doesn't really usually change that much. And so what happened was, I'll share with you this in a moment about it. So what you can assess this through what's called the Kolbe test. And then also do a Kolbe right fit test. So why would we care to do something like this? Because if we are expecting someone in a particular role to work in a certain way, if they aren't built naturally to work that way, and then there's always going to be tension. There's always going to be a strain. And so even if they can still do the job, they likely will not be perhaps a good long-term fit. And so one tip is there are 2 tips. You want to find the right balance among the team. And for example, I just did this recently, even the last week, as it relates to hiring. There's somebody I really liked when I first interviewed them. And guess what? When I actually had them get assessed for the role that I'm interested in, they were just, it was just too far apart from what would be like, it would create too much tension on their end and also on ours, right? So, but I'm just going to show you this is my Colby. So I'll just highlight one thing about it. For example, I'm a quick start. So what is I'm a high number in quick start. So there's nothing bad about a low number. There's nothing great about a high number in particular, but it's really it helps measure strength, right? Helps measure strengths and in these things. So for example, I like to start things very quickly. If I get excited about something, I'm going to start it really quickly, and that's the first thing that I do. Whereas there are other people, if we hire other people who are all like that, then a lot of things will get started and probably not finished. So that's why you need, for example, balanced energy on your team with this. And so just to give you an example of this, we had this a hire who I really liked, and she came with great references, and she was also very sharp. But once this person was in their role, there's just a lot of mistakes, and there were a lot of things that just weren't done in the way that I would have, that I felt like were really up to standards. And I thought, what is going on? It must be me. I must need to be a better leader. I must need to train them better. I was really looking at, well, what did I do wrong in the picture and how can I fix it? And then guess what happened? This person took this right fit of this role and they came out an F. And I thought, oh, that explains it, right? Because the way I was expecting them to work was just totally different than how they were just naturally like and their strengths. And so this is such a valuable part of the hiring process to say here, this is the F, right? So such a valuable part of the hiring process for you to actually take into consideration in terms of before you hire, and even when you already have hires on your team, for you to have the best synergy. Because sometimes you might find someone really great, but they might not be the right fit for that kind of role, but they might be a fit for something else. So in terms of the toolkit, I just want to make sure, as we wrap up here, I want to make sure to give you things. So again, here's the link to the toolkit, because many of you are in a place where, well, what are, aside from interviewing questions, well, what do you ask in your reference check? So that, we actually have asked people and their answer in terms of in the reference check process. And they said, oh, that's a good question. I should ask that myself, right? So these are likely things that you haven't thought of before. So I'm going to give you in that toolkit those templates. And the other thing that I was thinking about doing for you, because the other thing is, just to keep in mind, what else is also after the hire? How is your leadership after the hire? Do you kind of expect people to read your mind? I confess I'm kind of one of those people sometimes, like naturally, like, well, why didn't they just get this thing? Then, oh, well, I didn't actually mention it explicitly, right? So part of their success after you hire them, because have you ever had challenges with that after you hire, and you feel like you wish they would just take on more initiative and that kind of thing, right? So do you have a good system for one, are you truly demonstrating and leadership well? Do you have a good system for onboarding? And then what's your 90-day onboarding plan? Do you have a 90-day onboarding plan? What about a scorecard? What do you have a way to measure their success? Do they even know what success looks like? So that way, it's not just you hire people who, where you are having to be so much of a doer, you could really step more into a CEO role. So that's the next level of growth for you. And I thought about this because you're the one thing really standing between where you are right now and having a practice where you that is in more ease and flow, and you're helping more people, and money's coming in when you're not having to always be there, is really having a plan, right? What makes the most sense for this level in your practice? And then do you have the leadership skills? Are you up leveling your leadership skills? Do you have systems you can plug into and that work for you, so you don't have to be reinventing the wheel all the time? So what I decided to do is to, because if you keep doing what you've always been doing, then you definitely will be getting what you've always got. And so what I decided to do to help you with this further, for those of you who do want to take this further, is to get you the access to those templates, and then also the roadmap too, the half your hiring time roadmap and checklist, along with the templates I promised you earlier. And then if you're feeling like you're at a place where you're at a plateau in your practice, where you just feel like you're capable of so much more, or you just are at a point where you want to do other things to free up your time and develop yourself and your practice in other ways, right? While things are humming along and then people are helped, then feel free to reach out to us, and happy to give you insight into this and your biggest frustration in your practice right now, and how we can help you grow faster too, and with more ease and flow. So feel free to click on the link there and then download those templates that promise you from our 4 weeks to new hire system, and then book in with us, and look forward to seeing you, to look forward to helping you further with this. And if you're listening in, I'll just give you the link out loud. So it's introvertedvisionary.com/hiring toolkit. So it's introvertedvisionary.com/hiring toolkit.
Wonderful. That was such a great presentation. There was a lot of resources that you shared, and I hadn't heard of the Cobble test. I'm going to actually go ahead and do that right now when we're done, because we all need a little bit of clarity and help just to be able to be more successful with what we're doing right now. So thank you so much. This has been an amazing experience learning from you, and you providing all these really valuable resources for us.
You're welcome. And then just to clarify, you'll be wanting to take the Colby test for yourself. And then if you're in a hiring situation, you'll also want to take the Colby right fit test. So it's different as well. So you'll want to have both, and then have the person who you're considering to hire to take it too. But yes, and so look forward to you getting these templates and getting the help that you need to grow, for those of you who want it. And feel free to book in, and let's have you have the end of the year where it's like you feel really proud of how this year's turned out, and really have a practice that you're proud of in this next level of growth for your practice. So excited for you, and we'll chat with you further moving forward. So
yes, thank you. Definitely for this past year, these are really great tools for us to feel empowered and to be able to step up our game in our profession, our career. So thank you so much, Tanyan, for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you everyone for joining us, whether you're joining us live through our Zoom or on our private Facebook page, or watching our recording on our YouTube channel. And you can find more resources from FASOMA at fasoma.org. And we will see you all next time. Thank you. Bye, everyone.